Thank you for having me, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for talking to me. It's an honor. I've enjoyed your work for so long. And this is an interesting role for you because he's a very complicated person, Will is. He has a lot of denial, he has a lot of baggage that comes with his life. His body is breaking down. He wants to do all these things with his career and his family. And I was wondering for you what it's like to get into the mindset of someone who is really in denial about where their life is headed and they are just singularly focused on their goal.
My character, Will, it seems like he's quite lonely. He's alone in a community where in this rodeo community, almost everyone around him is hearing. But he really wants to prove himself and prove them all wrong and say, hey, I know I can do it if I believe in myself and prove everybody wrong. And he's aggressive in that way. He's motivated in that way. He gets paid when he succeeds, but he lost his wife. Both of his kids are making the wrong decisions involved in these criminal enterprises, and he's really hoping that things will change for the better. But he becomes a bit bitter and he feels lost. He loses his faith. And at some point he's struggling. He's drowning in this world of suffering, and he really wants to get his head above water and begin to breathe. So my character is going through a huge challenge, and it was fun for me to go through his journey.
Now, as someone who grew up in Arizona, were you ever exposed to this kind of cowboy culture a little bit? I know the film takes place in Calgary and in Canada, but I was wondering if this was a world that you had any exposure to growing up.
Yeah.
Yes and no. But in real life, I'm not a professional rodeo competitor. But yes, I did ride horses growing up. And of course, in Arizona, we have a very strong Western cowboy and horse culture where I grew up. And I like to feel the pulse of that feeling. And in Calgary and in Ponoka, where we were shooting at the actual Ponoka Stampede, there's real professional cowboys in Calgary and in Ponoka. And I was very impressed when we were visiting set at the Ponoka Stampede and watching these actual rodeo riders compete and real audience members as well. And so it really felt like it was overwhelming, and seeing, you have to just put on a show and you have to compete. You only have a few seconds to prove yourself. It's really amazing. And I'm so glad that I had that experience. And of course, there were stunt riders riding for me, but we had a 5-minute time period where we were shooting at the actual Ponoka Stampede with thousands of people in the audience. We had to run in. The rodeo riders fell, stunt rider A, stunt rider B. I had to fall right where they fell. And we did 2 takes in 5 minutes, and with real audience watching. It was a wonderful experience.
You're my sister, and I'm worried about you.
Hey, Eva. Congratulations.
Don't let him get to you.
I don't.
It's interesting, like looking back on some of your most recent films, like this and Coda and even Primate. They all have a very very strong family connection that the story revolves around. And this is kind of a 2-part question, but I'll start here. What is it like trying to establish a family dynamic beyond the script and getting to know the actors?
In real life, I have a daughter. She's 20 now, and so I really understand what it's like having that family dynamic as a father with a teenage girl and so on. And so when we were shooting Coda, the actor who played my daughter, Amelia Jones, reminded me of my daughter in real life. Then in Cold Life, Micah Monroe also reminded me of my daughter. They're a similar age. It was very easy for me to develop that chemistry. And in Primate as well with Johnny Sequoia. And I had 2 daughters in Primate. So it was really important to spend time with these actors, get to know each other, play games, be playful on and off set, rehearse, and so on. It's important to have a good relationship and develop that chemistry to do what's best for the story, and so that you can print it on picture in the movie. And so it's really an important part of the process is really to make sure that they have an understanding about deaf culture and sign language, and then it makes it much easier for them to jump in and begin to collaborate and work together.
kind of feelings you have for your old man? He said he wanted to save you from yourself.
As someone, this is the second part of the question. As someone who has a theater background and someone that's done a lot of stage work, do you think it's easier to create a family dynamic on stage when you perform the same material night after night versus working on these smaller films and independent films that sometimes have limited resources and limited amount of times to shoot? What's the difference for you between trying to create a family dynamic on stage versus trying to create one in a film?
That's an interesting question. So rehearsing on stage, you might take 1 to 2 months of rehearsal. And that's a big advantage of working in the theater, is knowing each other and developing that chemistry. And then you're working 6 nights a week. And sometimes on a lunch break, you might go and chat and hang out. And of course, have these discussions about your characters, about the background of your family relationships and dynamics and so on. And now going to an independent film, it might be, you might meet like right before you're shooting, you know, or even on set the first day of shooting, because you don't have any time to get to know your fellow actors on the same day of shooting. You might have flown in the night before. It's nearly impossible. So to develop that family feeling, you need to feel comfortable with one another and really have that chemistry. And so if the story, so imagine I have a son that I haven't seen in 20 years. We might feel differently and have a different type of energy. And that would be in that family dynamic. Then if I was very, very close to my son, then it would be a different type of family dynamic. So it really depends on the story.
Yeah. As someone who has seen your work recently in Primate and in this, one of the things that I love about both films is that your character being deaf is something that doesn't need to be explained to the audience. It's something that everyone in the family takes as an established fact. No one, I think in the past, we would have people stop the story to say, oh, he's deaf, we need to address this. But I think there's something very freeing about seeing films where a deaf character is just allowed to be a deaf person. And I was wondering for you what it's like to be able to partake in films like this, where it's established the other characters can hear, he's deaf, and it's not that big of a deal.
That's a very good question, and I appreciate that. I'm always careful about the projects I choose and the scripts that I choose, because I don't want to talk about deafness or be a victim or someone who needs to be helped. That's lame. I would always pass on a script that portrayed a deaf character as a victim. I want to change perspectives and do something that people haven't thought of. And really, this character happens to be deaf. I'm not playing a character who it's not just deaf, just the character happens to be deaf. You might go into a restaurant and see a deaf couple chatting in sign language. And that happens in real life. Oh yeah. And you're familiar with that these people exist in the world. So why can't sign language or deafness or a character who happens to be deaf exist in the world that's on screen? You accept people from other countries who communicate in different languages. We watch their movies. They watch our movies. That's my point. And that's the point of storytelling, is I'm just playing characters that happen to be deaf, period.
And the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about was something very specific to this film. And I think it's one of the most memorable scenes that I've seen in a film in a long time. And it's a scene where you and Micah are having an argument in the backyard and the motion detector light keeps going off. And I think that's such a very realistic scene that I think would play out in real life exactly like that. And I was wondering what it was like to create that dynamic in the middle of that scene that's so visually original and very realistic.
When I read the script and I read that scene, I said, yes, definitely. That was one of my favorites from the get-go, because that applies to real life being a deaf person, and everyone in the deaf community has had a similar experience with motion sensor lights being so annoying and shutting off in the middle of the conversation, because you would become deaf and blind when the light shuts off. And if it was a hearing character, the light turning off doesn't really affect the scene that much. You're like, yeah, okay. But being deaf, where you communicate visually, there's an extra layer of tension. It makes the story even heavier and deeper. And it's such a sensitive conversation that we're having about the loss of my character's son.
หยิบโล
So I think it made it even more nuanced and layered and unique. And for a hearing audience to experience that and see that, they learn something new and see a different perspective. And the deaf audience can definitely relate to it and have that mutual understanding and connection. And that's why it's such a great scene. I think the hearing and deaf audiences can both share this experience and this perspective together.